he's the kid who loves being Captain Marvel, but he also likes being Billy. But the downside to being Billy is, I mean, the downside to being Captain Marvel is, like I said, the wisdom of Solomon is constantly buzzing in your ear. And also you were responsible for everything. If you're Captain Marvel, you've got to be responsible for the whole world. The downside to being Billy is once you've operated as Captain Marvel and now you're walking around as Billy again, you just feel heavy. You just feel gravity and you feel weak and you feel slow. And so this is, something that Billy also has to deal with in terms of that dichotomy.
Uh, Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am back with Mark Waid, and we are talking
Hey,
about Shazam.
yeah.
Shazam. Uh, Mark, you've been announced with Dan Mora as launching a new Shazam series starting in June of this year. What led to that?
Couple of things. I mean, my unabashed love for that character, I think, is pretty well known in the DC halls. Uh, Dan is exactly the right artist for this, especially since he's not leaving World's Finest and he can do 2 books a month because he's that fast. Um, and I think there's, with the dawn of DC, I can't speak for DC editorial on the whole, but I would think that, my understanding of it is let's get back to and reinforce the core characters in the DC universe and really shine the spotlight on the core characters in the classic sense that we know them.
I love Captain Marvel, the original Captain Marvel, and you do too. And I think the thing is, you've talked about how the DC halls very well know your love for the original Captain Marvel. I don't think it's something that fans really recognize about you because you're so associated with Superman, but
Right.
you've been writing Captain Marvel for a very long time with Underworld Unleashed and Kingdom Come. What is it that you love about the character?
There's an innocence to that character that I like. There's a lightheartedness to that character that I like. That appeals to me. The kid who says a magic word and turns into himself as an adult is not an approach I would have taken if it were just me. But I understand that in the greater DC cosmology, it's got to be Billy and Cap are the same guy. Um, I kind of lean away from that a little bit, but I get the wisdom of that. Uh, so that's some of the fun of it. I mean, the the world is just so whimsical, but there's ways to do that where it doesn't feel old fashioned and doesn't feel out of date.
Were you a big fan of the Golden Age Captain Marvel?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I was a big fan. I caught on to him the same as a lot of people in my generation did when DC started relaunching the book of Shazam. And from the get go, I was interested in the character. Since then, I've gone back and I've read, I guess about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I did a complete read through of every single Captain Marvel story and Captain Marvel Jr. story and Mary Marvel's story from the 1940s on through present day, just to really wrap my. But it was before I even dreamed of having the assignment. It was just something I really wanted to do, and discovered a lot of things tonally about those characters.
What do you think really made them work back then? I mean, because all three of those characters that you mentioned, when you take a look at their individual series, they all
Mm-hmm.
have very different tones. Captain Marvel Jr. does not look like Mary Marvel, does not look like Captain
Right.
Marvel. Even when they're in the same story, they're all drawn differently. So what
Yeah.
do you think made that really powerful?
Well, I think the commonality that makes all of them work back then is that it's just a magic word. You don't have to be Batman, you've got to be, trained and you've got to go through all this regimen and you have to be a billionaire. To be Superman, you have to come from another planet. With Captain Marvel, all you had to say was one magic word and boom. I think that's a huge part of the appeal of it is that it's just so childlike in its simplicity.
And of course, even with their Superman type level powers, uh, the threats that they fight, they're not always world threatening,
It,
right?
that was the one, I'm not going to say stumbling block, but that was one of the hurdles that I had to face as I was trying to figure out what to do with this book. And that is that, and this is coming from somebody who loves the character, so don't, this is not a knock. But if you go back and look at those Shazam stories of the 40s and 50s and even the 70s that were trying to sort of get that spirit back a little bit, the common thread there is that the stakes are always very low, always very low. Captain Marvel finds a book that can foretell the future. That's a story. Captain Marvel finds a piece of thread that it turns out the other end of it is in another dimension somewhere, and they go find whoever's there. That's a story. And these are fun, whimsical, enjoyable stories, but they don't have stakes.
Yeah.
And the tightrope we have to walk on this book is to not make it dark, not make it gritty, make it fun to read and about characters that you want to spend time with, but at the same time, putting some stakes on stuff, making putting real emotion in the stories and real dilemmas and real problems and real threats, because that's how you keep it from looking like it was a relic of the 1960s or 70s.
Who would you really say is the main character of a Captain Marvel or of a Shazam book? Is it
I
in
know,
fact
I
the
know. We,
superhero or Billy
yeah,
Batson?
I, hmm. I mean, it's half and half, isn't it? It really is half and half. You know, I, I like playing with, and again, I'll just call him Captain Marvel. We don't call him Captain Marvel in the book, but I will never not be able to call him Captain Marvel when I'm just relaxed. So, in the book, he's just called the Captain, and
Okay.
that is the other kids' names for him because, and we just do a one panel thing where we show there was a maritime accident. Captain Marvel is soaking wet somehow. The other, Mary and Junior are laughing at him and saluting him, and they start calling him Captain just as a poke, and the name sticks. So in the same way that the Doctor sticks when it's Doctor Who, he doesn't go around calling himself I'm the Captain, but when people ask him point blank, he's got to say something. He can't just say the magic word. I know for a while in DC continuity recently, they said he could say the magic word Shazam, but he had to be thinking about it to be a super something like that.
Yeah, to intend to transform.
Yeah, see that? I mean, I understand where that comes from, but it takes all the magic out of the word.
Yeah.
We're using Lazarus Planet as our excuse to say magic works differently now in the DC universe, and it does in a lot of different places in a lot of different books. It'll be working a little bit differently, but in Shazam, one of the fallouts is you can't say the word anymore, dude. You change, whether you like it or not. Because I like that. I like the limitation. I like when you put interesting limits on characters, because it forces you as a writer to just work harder and think harder. You know, it's is it dumb and almost impossible to come up with a way for Mitch's Pitlick to say his name backwards now? Yes. I don't know how, it's that's a pretty hard nut to crack. But if you take that away from that character, then he's just not interesting anymore. That's one of the cool things about having Mitch's Pitlick in your stories. He has to say his name backward to get rid of him. Uh, with Green Lantern, if you make that ring completely, powered all the time, and there's no time limit on it or no power limit on it, then so what? Then it's not an interesting tool. Then it doesn't. There's no challenge as a writer to try to come up with some interesting way around that. I don't know.
With that philosophy, this is a little bit of a digression. With that
Yeah,
philosophy, is there a character that you would really find it difficult to write because they don't have a weakness, like the Silver Surfer, for example?
it would be tough to write Silver Surfer. Thor is another one too. I've never been comfortable writing Thor because, I mean, he has weaknesses in the fact that if you're stronger than Thor, which is not often. You can punch him, but that's not, there's not an interesting weakness. It's more, I like the more, you know, oh, look, there's kryptonite, or, oh, there's just something, some limitation, some weakness that's interesting to me.
Who would you say is Captain Marvel's greatest villain?
It's
Because
got to
there are
be
three possible answers to this question.
right. Well, it's got to be Savannah.
Yeah.
I mean, number one. But certainly Mr. Mind and Black Adam are two and three on your list, I'm guessing,
Yeah.
unless you're talking about Mr. Banjo or something. Uh,
Why not? Yeah,
why
it's those three.
Yeah, it won't be Mr. Banjo. There'll be no Mr. Banjo in this. For those who don't know who Mr. Banjo is, which is everyone but me. His villainous thing was, this is World War II. Mr. Banjo was actually sending coded messages to the Nazis about American intelligence by plucking certain notes on his banjo in the middle of his songs. Not all ideas are winners. That's all I can tell you.
This is a question that might be controversial, and I will remove this if you're not comfortable answering
Yeah.
it. There has been talk about reprinting the Monster Society of Evil in DC
Bad idea.
Comics. Bad idea.
Bad,
Okay. Yeah.
bad idea.
Why is it a bad idea? I mean, I think I know the
It
answer.
is, just to put it in context for the readers, in the 1940s, there was a 25-part continued story in Captain Marvel Adventures that was, put him up against the greatest villains of his oeuvre, if you will, and a bunch of different situations. And there's Nazis, and there's this, and there's that. But it is so replete with racism that it's just hard to look at it. The black characters with their giant watermelon lips, and the treatment of Japanese characters and Japanese people in those stories. It's just hard to look at, and I totally get why, from an archaeological standpoint, it's fascinating. I mean, I have a copy of the hardcover that they printed like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Not DC, but somebody else licensed the property and was able to, produce a big hardcover volume. It's also not that great a story, to tell you the truth. It's okay.
Right. Yeah.
The only thing that makes it, the only reason anybody talks about it is because it's the story that introduced Mr. Mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And there is a fable about that story that's not really true, which is that when I started reading the story, the way it had always been told to me was Captain Marvel didn't know who Mr. Mind was for most of the thing. It was at the very end, the reveal was, oh, this big villain is actually a tiny little worm. No, he knows it's Mr. Mind is a worm pretty early on, as I recall. Uh, that's the only thing that makes the story appealing. Beyond that, I understand. Even you can slap all of the trigger warnings and this was done at a different time. You can slap all that on there you want, but it doesn't matter, because someone will find it and be offended by it regardless, and justifiably so, and alert the media, and before you know it, it's a shit show, and DC's caught in the middle of that, and it's a no-win situation. So for the 85 people who still desperately want to read the Monster Society of Evil, some of that stuff is in public domain.
Yeah.
I don't know that. So there are sites out there that have copies for download that are not pirated copies, because these are, there's a certain number of Fawcett comics were never registered properly, so they fall in the public domain. So if you want a taste of that kind of stuff, you can Google and find those comics.
I'm a huge fan of the Golden Age Captain Marvel, and I read that story. I read that story on one of those websites as the first Shazam movie was coming out, and I was thinking, one, this is terrible, and two, if you want to launch this story, reprint this story, coming out with it when a movie is out is the worst possible idea.
The worst possible idea. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Again, I get it. DC didn't publish. Remember, they were going to do a 2-volume collection of the first 26 issues of detective comics back in a few years ago, the ones leading up to Batman's premiere, and they pulled the plug. I don't know exactly, no one's told me internally exactly why, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out. You look at that material, and uh, oh my God, the casual racism of it, and chauvinism of it, and bigotry of it, which was just the way things were done back then,
Yeah.
without a thought. That stuff is really hard to defend in the 21st century, no matter how many trigger warning labels you slap on the thing.
Captain Marvel was the biggest hero of the Golden Age. What do you think has been the struggle of getting him to be on that same level, or pretty much on a higher level as he has been in the last 40
Yeah,
years?
he's definitely a product of his time. I don't know that. I don't know that he would have survived well into the 50s and 60s. He and his, I mean, you want to believe you because again, he was such a popular character. He outsold Superman for a long time. The book was so popular, it came out every third week, or it wasn't even monthly. It was like they would put out like 18 issues a year. Um, but if you look at, and I think you'll track with me on this. You've read all this stuff. Is if you get in, was you start to get in the 1950s with Cap, the series ended in 1953. It's clear that there is an innocence that is being lost. It becomes a horror book to some degree. It becomes he's either fighting communists or monsters, and that's what it's. And the covers are more gruesome. The interior, again, it's never blood and guts, but it's just it's harsher. And I don't. That's not a good place for that character to go. So clearly, they were struggling back in the 50s to try to make it work. Even then, now the hurdle it will always have is that it's at core not dark and grim and ugly and gritty, and superhero fans don't like that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? There's maybe also the fact that CC Beck and Otto Binder are so tied to that, to the identity of that book in a way that even Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster
Right.
aren't really the Superman, because they kind of changed Superman pretty early on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you could say that about Kirby and the Fantastic Four too.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Um,
I
you
will also
have
say this. I will also say, let me say also that in defense of the 1970s Shazam comics, CC Beck quit that book. He was hired by DC to come back and draw those new stories. He was one of the originators of the original book, like you said, the name most closely tied to it. And it's famous that he came aboard and he got what he thought were terrible scripts, and they didn't understand Captain Marvel at all, and so he walked off in a huff. I I've read those stories. I read them contiguous with the Golden Age stuff. They're not far afield. They're
they're
really
not.
not. They're really not. This is just a cranky old man who was, a curmudgeon by everyone's account, who was angry and upset about everything all the time. So I think those books get a little bit of a bad rap in that sense because, whenever historians refer to them, whenever I see people write about them, they're always writing as if, they didn't quite get no, they totally got it. So anyway,
But was that the issue, that they totally got it in 1976?
yeah, and nobody cared, I
Um,
mean, it was Kirby's idea to bring the book back. Yes.
no, I didn't know that. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, Evan tells the story that it was Jack Kirby who remembered, this is because, again, this is 71. He comes aboard DC Comics, and Carmine Infantino, the publisher, is working with him to try to come up with new ideas and stuff. And Jack remembered, how fabulously selling those comics were, and how great that character was. Remember, he and Joe Simon even did one of the first Captain Marvel Captain Marvel comics from cover to cover, special edition comics #1, I guess. And so he came to Carmine and said, we should do this. And it eventually happened. It happened, and Jack didn't even mean like I should do this. He just meant like somebody should do something with this. But the mistake, again, who knows? I mean, I want to say the mistake was you tried to make it exactly like it was in 1947, and that's not the audience anymore.
Let's talk about the times that you've written Captain Marvel. So, Underworld Unleashed and Kingdom Come, I feel that in both cases, you put him in stark contrast with Superman every time.
Yep.
What do the two characters have in relation to each other? What sets Cap apart from your favorite superhero?
From Superman, that there is, first off, there's the magical element. That's something I want to lean into a little bit more with the ongoing series, is that it is a world full of magical whimsy as opposed to Superman's heavy science world, and his science villains. So Cap dealing with magic is one of the things that sets him apart. There's also, I mean, he's there's Clark is a grown up and Billy is not, and there's a point of view with that character that you can't replicate with Superman, because you could replicate it with Superboy, but you can't really replicate it with Superman. Though, I mean, the power set is very similar, but the one that everybody keeps forgetting is he has the wisdom of Solomon. So every time you play Captain Marvel as a dope, or every time you play Captain Marvel, I mean, and again, I like Zach Levi's portrayal of the character. The one thing that grates on me is the constant, oh my gosh, wow, dude, as opposed to, no, there's wisdom of Solomon. There's something there. It doesn't mean that he has to be a super genius. And my take on the wisdom of Solomon is that it's not that it makes you super smart, because Solomon wasn't smart. He was just clever. There's nothing really smart about saying I want to cut a baby in two just to trick two women into, you know, giving up figuring out who's the real mother.
That's just cunning.
It's a cunning. And so for Cap, the wisdom is clarity. Is I see as I see it as clarity in a problem that Billy or most people wouldn't necessarily have, but Cap would have a certain clarity about how to solve this problem or that problem. The downside to the wisdom of Solomon is that it's wisdom. I heard wisdom once described, and this is really good, as doing favors for your future self. And so, to my mind, one of the things about the wisdom of Solomon that drives Billy nuts is that it's like living with a constant voice in your head that says, eat your vegetables, go to bed at a reasonable time tonight, do your homework, stop spending so much time playing video games. Just a constant in his ear. And every once in a while he has to turn into Billy just to get away from that.
How do you balance out the wisdom of Solomon with the mind of a child?
It is hard, and I want there to be, because there hasn't been for a long time. I want there to be a clear delineation in how they speak, how Billy and Cap speak a little bit, not huge, but how they speak, how they react to things. There is just a maturity that comes with being Captain Marvel that isn't just Billy in a red suit. It should be wisdom of Solomon. There should be something about that character that has a little bit more of a mature sense to that character. Also, I don't know that I would trust especially in a world with Superman and Green Lantern and all these other confident Justice Leaguers, as a citizen of the world, I'm not sure I would easily trust a superhero who was that gullible and goofy all the time.
It's true. I think somebody mentioned, it might have been Grant Morrison, who said something like, if he was gullible and goofy all the time, if he had the mind of a child all the time, then he's just a stunted child.
Yes, exactly. And you know what? Comics has plenty of, or at least used to have plenty of teenagers in superhero suits. So what's one more? This should be different. I'm
Right.
always looking for the unique in these characters. You're always looking for the thing that sets them apart from other characters. And every time you take something away from those characters like that, you just make them like everybody else, and that's dumb.
One of the things that you always point out with something like Underworld Unleashed, and even in a way with Kingdom Come, is that Billy does have a sense of clarity and a purity that even Superman does not have.
Yes.
Are you carrying that over into this book?
Yeah. Yeah. It's you. I mean, not. not quite as heavily in that if I'm using Billy as a character somewhere else, if I'm doing him in an issue of Flash or something, it gives me the latitude to make Billy really a super goody two shoes character. If he's carrying his own monthly book in a modern world with a modern audience, he can't be that squeaky clean. It doesn't mean he's a jerk. It just means he should be a real kid.
Yeah. Does a young Billy Batson in your story, do you lean a bit into the juvenile delinquency of the movie, or?
No, no, he's the kid just trying to get by, and he's the kid who loves being Captain Marvel, but he also likes being Billy. But the downside to being Billy is, I mean, the downside to being Captain Marvel is, like I said, the wisdom of Solomon is constantly buzzing in your ear. And also you're responsible for everything. If you're Captain Marvel, you've got to be responsible for the whole world. The downside to being Billy is once you've operated as Captain Marvel and now you're walking around as Billy again, you just feel heavy. You just feel gravity and you feel weak and you feel slow. And so this is, something that Billy also has to deal with in terms of that dichotomy.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that kind of take where Billy
Yeah.
feels the heaviness of not being Captain Marvel.
Why wouldn't he? I mean, he literally, you know, he he can't catch the bus now. It's just it would weigh on him. Imagine if you had those powers and then you didn't. You would remember what it felt like to fly, and you would be sad that you can't fly.
What prevents him from just, say, flying to school every day?
That I mean, he does sometimes. He does sneak in that under the wire, sometimes. But he also, with as Captain Marvel, he can't relate to his family as well. It's not like Captain Marvel can be hanging around a bunch of other foster teenage kids that are his foster family, unless they have the power to, which they don't right now. They may again. Mary has it, and she is called Mary Marvel now. Yay. Um, we can do that. Freddy does not have it right now, although Cap is working on it. It's Lazarus Planet fallout. It's that magic is not working the same as it did, and Cap is always genuinely looking for a way to restore his ability to share his power, but right now he can't. So that said, if he wants to spend any time with his foster family, he's got to be Billy.
It's got to be Billy. Would you have preferred if Mary was his twin sister in this continuity? Or does it make it not a difference?
It doesn't make, I haven't really given it much thought, I guess it doesn't make much difference to me.
Okay. What do you think makes the rest of the family so special, or not special as a word, depending on your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, Freddie is just interesting because he can be a little more cynical and he can be, they're all good kids, but I think Freddie leans a little bit more towards the operator, the kid who can get you the kid who can get you anything.
He's useful even without his powers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Although he misses his powers quite a bit, and that's a runner in the series. As far as the other kids go, I mean, Jeff Johns did a really good job of creating them, introducing them, bringing them on stage, and I do want to use them. I don't. I'm not in a position right now to use all, six of them or whatever, because it's well, the big reason is because, and you can see this in my Flash work, you can see this in Captain America work, you can see this in all the books I take over. I kind of put the supporting cast to the side for just a little while because my focus is on the main character and trying to get that right and trying to hit that out of the park and really understanding that, which I can't. I can do all the prep work I want, but I don't really get it until I write a few issues and then feel comfortable. And that's when you can start to bring some of the supporting cast back in and their supporting cast.
One of the things you also do is you start off with a lighthearted feel and then very slowly bring in the heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Is that something we can look forward to in this book?
Yeah. I mean, heavy's not quite the heavy's not quite the right word, but dramatic. I mean, I do think that it ends on the story. The first issue begins on a very happy, light note, and it ends on not a dark note, but a sort of surprising and scary note. Because
Mm.
again, stakes. Got to have stakes.
And speaking of those stakes, what
Mhm.
villains can we expect in this ongoing? At
I'm
least to
still
start with.
working on. I'm still working on this because I think I promised Gorilla Grodd at some point. I think that I'm still back and forth on this. I don't want to rely just on, oh, look, it's Mr. Mind, Savannah, Mr. Adam, back and forth and back and forth. He's got a, he's got a large rogues gallery, but a very small rogues gallery when it comes to characters that you could actually use in modern day and not be ridiculous. Um, I am part of me wants to bring more DC villains in and bring other elements from the DC universe in. And then another part of me is resisting this because that doesn't seem to have helped him before. In a way, he works best when he sort of is over in the corner of the DC universe and not really interacting with the DC universe. I mean, this gets back, and I think you and I have talked about this before, but this all gets back to the reason the DC universe will never be as cohesive as the Marvel universe, right?
Yeah.
The Marvel universe was created by 5 or 6 different people, all working in concert in a very short period of time, and suddenly you had this explosion, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Hulk, Iron Man, all done by Stan, Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, and a couple of other people.
And most of them live in New York.
And was low in New York. And it was designed to be a coherent universe. DC was not. DC was just a bunch of books. And we kept buying characters from other companies and adding them in. And so it's hard for me to wrap my head. There's part of me where it's hard for me to wrap my head around Captain Marvel and Green Arrow being in the same story because, like, tonally, that just doesn't work. And if you're going to make it work, you're going to have to change one of those characters radically. You're going to have to do something to make one level up to the other. And I don't, I do think that the Shazam characters sort of work best when they're over in the corner. I don't have the luxury of saying, oh, they're in another Earth and they have no contact with anybody else. But I do think that on the whole, I want to resist as long as I can putting, Luther and Brainiac in the book.
But you have been using Captain Marvel in World's Finest.
Yeah. Well,
And
yeah, only as I have I? No, or did I use Billy?
use Billy.
Yeah.
That was brilliant, by the way, because it's like, oh yeah, he has a kid, and then oh crap, he has that kid.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Surprise, it's that kid. Yes.
Very powerful stuff. But so using Billy
Mhm.
in the DC universe, in the main DC universe work, is different from using DC in Captain Marvel books. Is that
It's
what you're saying?
different. Yeah, it is. Is there it's easier to use the Shazam characters in another DC comic than it is to bring DC comics into a Captain Marvel comic because of the tone, because it has a very unique tone to it. So it's easier to tweak that if Captain Marvel, and again, he's not called Captain Marvel anymore, but this is all my brain knows how to do. Um, am I making any sense? You can see what I'm saying
I
here.
can
It's
see what you're
easier. It's
saying.
easier to do it one way, but it goes well one way, but it doesn't always go well the other way, the other direction.
Yeah, I remember reading Jerry Ordway's Power of Shazam and thinking that by the time he starts really using Blaze
Yeah,
as a regular character and that was a regular villain in that book, I was like, this is kind of weird. And I don't really know why it's weird, but
yeah,
I think it's because she's a Superman villain.
right. I do think one of the exceptions I want to play with, if I'm going to play with any exceptions, is, and I haven't made a list of DC villains I could use, but they all tend towards not comical, but they tend towards the sort of the weirder, stranger villains that you don't normally get in a Batman and Superman story. Monsieur Mala, and the Brain, that's they're Doom Patrol villains, but I
Doom
mean
Patrol
they're
stuff.
yeah, but there's a weirdness to that actually I think integrates better into the Shazam universe than like Joker.
Yeah.
If it were up to me, Joker and Captain Marvel would never meet. I don't want to see them in the same story. I think it's a terrible mistake to put them in the same story.
I don't even know how that would work.
No,
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about Dan Mora? He's doing this book with
so,
you, and he's still doing World's Finest. He's not off World's
yeah,
Finest.
no, he's a machine. Last week he turned in stick figure thumbnails on a few pages because that's what he always does going in, which is a great process because that gives me a chance to go, this is awesome, or maybe frame it this way, or you didn't leave room for balloons here or whatever, but which he always does. I mean, again, it's I 98% of the time I look at his stick figures and go, that's perfect. And the other 2% is, oh, I didn't make it clear in the script. So anyway, so he turns in stick figures on a page at he turns them in at 8:16 in the morning. At 8:20, I get a chance to take a look at them and I send him an email back saying, this is great. At 10:16 that same morning, a fully inked page. I don't know how he does it. It's phenomenal. I open my email less than 2 hours later. Here's a fully inked page. Oh my, from scratch. He's insanely fast. I know. I know. I know he's got his wife helping him do stuff, but he also has like 3 kids and a real family and stuff. So he's not like he's just you know, a single guy who can spend 20 hours a week, 20 hours a day doing comics if he wanted to. He's got a family. I don't know how he does it. God bless him.
That's
But the fact that
incredible.
he can, I know, but he can do 2 books at once and covers and all kind of other stuff. So God bless him.
Mark, around 2 years ago, you weren't even working at DC, and now it feels like you're everywhere in DC.
It's
You
the best.
you just created a new map of the multiverse. Uh,
Yeah.
what was that like? Because you
It's
did
fun.
that too, like 20 years ago.
Yeah. It's fun. I mean, it's DC editors are so much fun to work with because they all are doing the same thing, which I appreciate. They all are basically saying, okay, here's what we want, go do it your way. you know we'll give you notes if we need to give you notes, but basically just, we trust you, go do this thing. And the amount of creative freedom I have is just unparalleled here, and it's great. And I'm getting to do all the things I want to do.
I know with the new map of the multiverse, you use the multiversity as your template.
Yeah.
I
and then
have,
I
yeah, go ahead.
and then I expanded from there. I'm sorry, you were going to say.
I have a question because a
Yeah.
couple of years ago there was a comic book that came out called Doomsday Clock
Mm-hmm.
that Jeff Johns tried to say that there was a new Earth called Earth 1985, which would feature the pre-crisis Earth. I
Right.
noticed that was not anywhere in your multiverse map.
It has a different name. I
Oh,
think we
okay.
call it I think we call it Earth 1956, which I thought was more fitting because that's the launch of the Flash in the Silver Age, and that's sort of, that feels like the beginning of Earth One to me. So remember, these are all Barry Allen's numbers.
Yeah,
So, and he's still finding worlds. So it's if there's any errors or mistakes or changes, I blame them all on Barry.
that's fine.
Yeah.
So, did you have so when you're looking at that, is there really that much of a storytelling potential in going back to the pre-crisis Earth at some point?
Yeah, I mean, look, every single what there's, I put 75 worlds on that list. Every single one of them is a story, if not a bunch of stories. There's only one that's not a story, and that is it's the one Earth on that list that I allowed myself like a little vanity, like a little just, this doesn't really need to belong here, but it's Earth 387, and it's an Earth where everything is exactly the same except everybody's a werewolf. And that just made me laugh out loud when I came across that reference. And so I thought, that's the one. I can justify every other world on that list from a storytelling point of view, but that's the one. I couldn't resist that one.
And when can we expect you to see you play with all of these different Earths?
I don't know. I mean, I do want to do the story of Batman Blue and Batman Gray sooner than later. I just don't know where or when. Um, I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead, to tell you the truth.
It's interesting that you want to do a story like that because I remember Superman Red and Superman Blue not being all that well received in the late
Right.
90s.
In the
So
late 90s, yes, but the original story, Superman Red and Superman Blue, is still it's a dumb story, but it's a classic story.
it's fun.
And there's just something about Batman Blue and Batman Gray that just makes me smile. Just the idea. I have no idea what I would do with the idea. I have no idea what that story would be. It's just that I feel like that would be fun to do.
That would be fun. It would be fun to see. Uh,
Yeah.
one of I'd like to close this off by saying that one of the things that I am reminded of now that you're back at DC
Mhm.
about your work is the way that you take ideas that seem really obvious, but nobody's ever really done it before. Like Batman putting on a Doctor Fate's helmet.
Thank you.
Things
Thank you.
like that. That's obvious. So
That's that's why the Doom Patrol's in the first arc of World's Finest, because I've never seen Batman and and the Doom Patrol in the same story ever. So let's do that. I want to do more of that. I want to take those characters to places that we know in the DC universe, but they've never been to.
eh,
And introduce villains that we know but they've never fought.
right. And things like Dick Grayson and Kara Zor-El.
Yeah, exactly. That was my crowning achievement, because I realized, as I trying to figure out what to do with those characters together, I realized they'd never been together. I've never in my entire life seen a story in which Dick Grayson and Kara Zor-El have had a conversation. So let's, what would that relationship be like? That's the fun. That's the best and easiest and funnest part for me is give me any two DC characters, pull them randomly out of a deck, and I can come up with a relationship between the two of them that you may not have thought about before.
And you drew that out too, because when they first meet in the series, they're already
Yeah.
cold towards each other.
Yeah. And then issue 12, which comes out in a couple of weeks. Is that right? Yeah, it comes out in a couple of weeks. That's the backstory. That's where we see the actual date that went horribly wrong.
I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to
Right?
read it. And also, introducing Magog. That
Yeah.
was
Surprise. Yeah. Were you surprised?
I was surprised and I was like, huh, I guess I should have seen that coming.
I I'm so proud of that. I mean, I kept telling people it's a character you know. People, the criticism was, well, this story's set in the past and we've never heard of Boy Thunder before, and why have we never heard of Boy Thunder? And my answer was always, you have, you just don't know it. And no one, I think one guy on one message board in one place made the connection. No one else did. So I'm glad it was a surprise to you who Boy Thunder really grows up to be.
It was pretty incredible. I was like, well, that was I should have seen that coming, yeah.
It
But
was. I've had that bullet in the chamber for 25 years. I've had that bullet. That was the original pitch for what became the Kingdom, which was the follow up to Kingdom Come.
oh
The
really?
idea, yeah, that was the idea that Superman had a sidekick at one point and it went horribly askew, and he grew up to be Magog. That was something that was, like I said, in my files from 25 years ago. And once I got World's Finest, I realized this would be a good place to dust it off.
The original plot for the kingdom wasn't Magog stealing
No, and I no longer remember why we made the change, but the original plot was largely what you've seen in Boy Thunder.
interesting. Huh.
Hmm.
So we've seen the kingdom twice, basically.
Yeah, actually, yes.
Thank you so much, Mark. This was a
You bet.
pleasure. I can't wait for everything else you're doing, but I really can't wait for your Shazam book.
No, my pleasure. I hope you'll enjoy it. I think you will.
Absolutely. I'm already very confident that I will.
Cool. All right. Take care.
Thank you very